Welcome back. The storm is our signal, the darkness our stage. You're here for that unique feeling, a shiver of fear and a sense of peace, all at once. Let's get the ritual out of the way. Subscribe and hit the bell to join every gathering. Like this video if the tale haunts you. Comment with your deepest fear. Your participation fuels the nightmares. There's no more time to waste. We begin now. Everyone in my small town knew the rule. Don't take the tracks home after dark. It was a 5-mile shortcut, a straight line cutting through the deep woods. We broke the rule one night because we missed the last bus. We weren't alone on those tracks, and the thing that walked with us, it didn't want us to get home. When you're 17, you think you're invincible. You think the rules are for other people. That was my first mistake. My second was thinking a 5-mile walk was better than a 15-mile one. My best friend Liam and I had stayed out too late, catching the last showing of a movie in the next town over. We missed the 11 p.m. bus back to our sleepy little town of Northwood. The next one wasn't until 6 a.m. We were broke. Our parents would kill us if we called them, and we were faced with a choice: a 15-mile walk along the winding, dark highway, or a 5-mile walk along the old, abandoned spur line that cut straight through the forest like an arrow. "It's a straight shot," Liam said, his voice full of a confidence I didn't feel. "We'll be home in an hour and a half tops. What's the worst that could happen?" The tracks were a local legend, a place kids dared each other to go at night. They were decommissioned 20 years ago, a ghost of the town's more prosperous past. We hopped the low, rusted fence and started our journey. The world immediately became quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of our sneakers on the gravel ballast and the chirping of crickets in the deep woods that pressed in on both sides. The 2 steel rails gleamed in the moonlight, stretching into an endless, perfectly straight line into the darkness. For the first mile, it was almost peaceful. We talked, we laughed, we felt the thrill of breaking a rule. We were conquering the local ghost story. We were about 20 minutes into the walk when I glanced over my shoulder. Far behind us, down the impossibly straight line of the tracks, was a light. It was a single yellow light, swinging gently from side to side in a steady, rhythmic arc. "Looks like we're not the only ones with this bright idea," Liam said, noticing it too. We assumed it was another walker with a flashlight, or maybe a railroad worker, though that didn't make much sense on a line that hadn't seen a train in 2 decades. We turned back around and kept walking, picking up our pace a little. The crunch of our footsteps seemed louder now. After another 5 minutes, I looked back again. The light was closer, and the person carrying it was making no sound, no footsteps on the gravel, just the silent, swinging light steadily closing the distance. A new, cold, prickly feeling began to crawl up my neck. "Let's speed up," I said to Liam, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. We started walking faster, almost a power walk. The light behind us sped up too, its swinging arc never breaking rhythm, maintaining the exact same distance of about 100 yards. We slowed down. The light behind us slowed down. We walked. It walked. It was perfectly, unnervingly matching our every move. It was a predator, pacing its prey. "Hello?" Liam yelled back into the darkness, his voice cracking a little. "Who's there?" The only reply was the oppressive silence of the forest and the faint, rhythmic creak of what sounded like a lantern handle. We could see the figure more clearly now, a tall, thin silhouette against the glow of its own light. It was a man, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned overalls and a cap, holding a vintage railroad lantern. He just kept walking, a silent, patient shadow escorting us from behind. The paranoia was a physical thing now, a tight knot in my stomach. This wasn't a worker. This wasn't a friendly walker. This was something else. This was the reason for the rule. "We have to run," I whispered to Liam. "And go where? Into the woods?" he hissed back. "We'll get lost in 2 minutes. Just keep walking. Maybe he'll turn off." But he didn't turn off. For another mile, he was our silent, unwanted companion. The psychological toll was immense. Every hair on my body was standing on end. I couldn't stand it anymore. "On 3, I said to Liam. 1, 2, 3. We bolted. We sprinted down the tracks, our feet slipping on the uneven gravel, our lungs burning. We didn't dare look back. We just ran, a pure animal panic driving us forward. After what felt like an eternity, we finally stopped, gasping for breath, our sides aching. We leaned over, hands on our knees, and looked down the long, straight track. The swinging light was gone. The track behind us was a void of perfect, empty darkness. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. We had lost him. It was over. "See," Liam gasped, a shaky grin on his face. "We just had to outrun him." We stood there for another minute, catching our breath, the silence of the woods returning to being peaceful. We turned to continue our walk. And there he was, standing silently on the tracks in front of us, about 100 yards ahead, his lantern held perfectly still, its yellow light casting long dancing shadows. He had impossibly, silently gotten ahead of us. The shortcut was no longer a line. It was a trap. We were completely, utterly trapped. We didn't know if the man was still behind us, and we knew with a soul-crushing certainty that he was now in front of us. We were being herded, pushed forward. "We have to go into the woods," I said, my voice a panicked whisper. "Now!" But as we looked into the dark, dense forest on either side of the tracks, we saw them. Faint yellow glints of light deep within the trees. More lanterns. He wasn't alone. We were flanked. The tracks were the only way forward. Up ahead we saw it, a skeletal silhouette against the moonlit sky, the most notorious landmark on this abandoned line, the old Black Creek Trestle. It was a massive, ancient railway bridge, a spiderweb of rusting steel that spanned a deep, rocky gorge 100 feet below. There was no walkway, no guardrails, just the railroad ties, spaced a terrifying foot and a half apart, with nothing but black, empty air in between. As we hesitated at the edge of the bridge, we saw the familiar swinging lantern appear on the tracks behind us, slowly closing the distance. We had no choice. We were being forced onto the trestle. The crossing was a waking nightmare. We moved slowly, deliberately, balancing on the thick, creosoted railway ties, our eyes fixed on our feet, trying not to look at the dizzying drop below. The wind howled through the steel framework of the bridge, trying to push us off balance. And in the very center of the bridge, he was waiting. He stood there, blocking our path, his lantern held high, casting a warm, terrible glow. We could finally see his face. It was gaunt, pale, and weathered, with eyes as dark and empty as the gorge below. He had a calm, almost serene expression on his face. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking past us, at the approaching lantern behind us. He seemed to be waiting for his partner to close the trap. Liam, who was a few feet in front of me, started to plead. "Please, mister, we're just trying to get home. We're sorry." The man didn't respond. He just slowly raised his other, empty hand. And he pointed. He pointed not at us, but down into the black, rocky abyss below the bridge. Then he spoke, his voice a dry, rusty whisper that cut through the wind. "The toll," was all he said. And in that same heart-stopping moment, we heard it, a sound that was completely, utterly impossible on this abandoned line, the loud, mournful, deafening horn of an approaching train. The steel tracks beneath our feet began to vibrate. We whipped our heads around. Far down the track, rounding the bend, was a single, brilliant, blinding headlight coming straight for us. Pure, absolute animal terror. We were trapped on a high, narrow bridge with a silent, pointing man in front of us and a phantom train thundering towards us from behind. The roar was deafening, the vibration shaking our very bones. Liam panicked. "I'm not going to die!" he screamed, and he tried to scramble past the silent man, the signal man. The man didn't move to stop him. He didn't have to. In his frantic haste, Liam's foot slipped on a wet railway tie. His leg went through the gap. He screamed, a high, sharp sound, as his momentum carried him over the edge. I reached out for him, but my fingers only brushed against his jacket as he fell, his terrified scream swallowed by the roar of the approaching train. I was frozen, my eyes fixed on the empty space where my best friend had just been. The train light was blinding now, the horn a solid wall of sound. The signalman was still there, his arm still pointing down into the gorge. I understood. The toll. One of us had to fall. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. I felt a massive, violent rush of wind, a force so strong it almost knocked me off my feet. The roar of the train was all-encompassing. And then, silence. A profound, deafening silence. I opened my eyes. I was standing alone in the middle of the bridge. The train was gone. The signalman was gone. The lantern was gone. There was nothing but the quiet whisper of the wind through the steel beams and the horrifying empty space next to me. I don't remember the rest of the walk. My next memory is of stumbling into my own house, a traumatized, incoherent wreck, just as the sun was rising. I told my parents and the police what had happened. They launched a search. They found Liam's body in the rocky creek bed at the bottom of the gorge. The official report called it a tragic accidental fall. There was no evidence of a train having been on those tracks for 20 years. No sign of any other person. My story was dismissed as the hysterical, guilt-ridden fantasy of a traumatized teenager. For years I was haunted by the guilt, by the memory of his scream. I moved away, went to college, and tried to forget. I'm a civil engineer now. Last year, I was working on a project that required me to look at old railway survey maps. On a whim, I looked up the old Northwood spur line. I found the original blueprints for the Black Creek Trestle, dated 1888. I read the old construction notes, my blood slowly turning to ice. The notes detailed a series of fatal accidents during the construction of the bridge, and they mentioned the name of the foreman who was in charge of the dangerous night work, the man responsible for the signal lanterns, a man who, according to a final grim entry, had vanished on the tracks a week before the bridge was completed. His name was Thomas, and his job title was Signalman. Then I found another document, a public record of every death recorded at that location, every accidental fall and suicide from the Black Creek Trestle. There was a name for almost every single year since 1888. It wasn't a blueprint, it was a ledger, and the bridge had been collecting its toll, one soul at a time, for over 100 years. When you miss your last train home, the worst thing you expect is a long, boring wait. You don't expect another train to come, one that isn't on the schedule, one that's completely silent. I saw that train. I saw its passengers, and I've learned that some destinations are worse than being stranded. I was a college student, and I was an idiot. I had stayed too late at a friend's apartment in the city, lost track of time, and missed the 11:42 p.m., the last commuter train back to my quiet suburban town. My phone was on 3% battery. I was stranded at the Hollow Creek station. Hollow Creek wasn't really a station. It was just a desolate, poorly lit platform with a small glass-walled shelter in the middle of nowhere, surrounded on all sides by a dark, dense forest. The next train wasn't until 5:30 a.m. I was facing a 6-hour wait, alone, in a place that felt like the edge of the world. For the first hour, the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of the occasional freight train passing on the express track. The silence in between was heavy, absolute. My phone died. I was completely cut off, a single vulnerable speck under a flickering yellow light. It was around 1 a.m. when I saw it, a single, dim, yellowish headlight appearing far down the tracks. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. A late train? A special service? But as the light grew closer, I realized something was wrong. There was no sound, no horn, no clatter of wheels on the track, no low, rumbling vibration in the concrete platform. It was moving in complete, unnatural silence. A train glided into the station, its movement impossibly smooth, like a phantom. It wasn't a modern commuter train. It was a vintage passenger train, the kind from the 1940s, with dark, old-fashioned Pullman cars. It looked like it had rolled straight out of a black-and-white movie. It hissed to a stop, the sound soft and sigh-like. A set of doors slid open directly in front of me, a silent, waiting invitation into the dimly lit car. I stood there on the empty platform, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. A ghost train. It had to be. My rational brain was screaming at me to run, but my tired, desperate body was just frozen. I peered into the open doorway. The car was full of people, but they were all wrong. They were dressed in clothes from the 40s and 50s, men in fedoras, women in hats with small veils. They sat perfectly still, their gloved hands resting in their laps, all of them staring straight ahead. No one was talking, no one was reading, no one was looking at a phone. They were like a collection of perfectly preserved, incredibly lifelike mannequins. The air that drifted out from the car was cold and smelled of dust and something like faint, decaying perfume. A figure appeared at the open door. A conductor, dressed in a pristine, old-fashioned dark blue uniform. His face was gaunt and pale, his expression completely neutral. He didn't speak, he just looked at me, his eyes dark and empty, and then he made a small, almost imperceptible come aboard gesture with his gloved hand. A jolt of pure primal fear finally broke my paralysis. I took a step back, shaking my head. "No," I whispered, though I don't think he could hear me. The conductor's expression didn't change. He didn't seem angry or disappointed. He just gave a single, slow nod, as if accepting a decision that he had expected all along. The doors slid silently shut. The train, with its cargo of silent, still passengers, began to glide away from the station just as silently as it had arrived, disappearing into the darkness. I was alone again on the platform, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was shaking uncontrollably, convinced I had just seen a ghost, a remnant of some long-forgotten tragedy. As I was trying to calm my nerves, I noticed something on the bench inside the glass shelter, a place I had been sitting just moments before. It was a single, elegant, long white leather glove. It wasn't mine. It was the kind a woman from the 1940s would wear. It hadn't been there before. One of the passengers, one of them, had left it for me. An hour passed. An hour of pure, adrenaline-fueled paranoia. Every rustle of leaves in the woods was someone creeping up on me. Every distant sound was the silent train returning. I clutched the cold, smooth leather of the glove in my hand, the only tangible proof that what I had seen was real. And then I saw it again. The same dim, single yellow headlight appearing silently in the distance. The same impossible train gliding back into the station. My nightmare was on a loop. It hissed to a stop in the exact same spot. The same doors slid open. I forced myself to look inside. The passengers were all there, in their exact same seats, in their exact same stiff, forward-facing poses. But there was one difference. One of the seats, a window seat in the middle of the car, was now empty. The seat where a woman, the kind of woman who would wear a long white glove, might have been sitting. The conductor appeared at the doorway again. His empty dark eyes looked at me. Then he glanced at the empty seat. Then he looked back at me, and he gave a slow, encouraging nod, as if to say, "There's a place for you now. We've made room." The horrifying truth slammed into me. The train wasn't just a ghostly replay. It was a collector. It was a system, and it was trying to fill a vacancy. The glove hadn't been an accident. It was a ticket. It was a claim. I scrambled to the far end of the platform, putting as much distance as possible between me and the open door. The conductor just watched me, his expression as placid and unchanging as a mask. He then looked down at the platform, at the glove which I had dropped in my panic. As I watched, the glove twitched. It lifted a few inches into the air as if held by an invisible hand and floated slowly and gracefully back through the open doorway and onto the empty seat. The doors slid silently shut. The train began to move, gliding away into the night, its mission for this hour incomplete. I knew I couldn't stay on that platform any longer. I was a target. I ran from the station, plunging into the dark, unfamiliar woods, choosing the unknown terror of the forest over the known terror of the train. As I ran, a new sound echoed through the trees, a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the sound of a train horn or whistle. It was the soft, polite, but insistent ding-ding of a train conductor's bell, and it was coming from the darkness right behind me. I was being hunted, not by a monster, but by a system, an orderly, silent, and impossibly patient predator that wanted to fill its empty seat. I hid in the woods for the rest of the night, the faint, polite ding-ding of the conductor's bell, a constant, terrifying companion, always just out of sight. As the first gray light of dawn broke through the trees, the sound of the bell finally faded away. Exhausted, cold, and covered in scratches, I made my way back to the train station. In the clean, normal light of the morning, it just looked like a sad, lonely train stop. The terror of the night felt like a fever dream. And then I heard it, a real sound, the loud, wonderful, beautiful roar of a train horn and the rumble of an approaching engine. My scheduled 5:30 a.m. train was pulling into the station. I have never been so happy to be surrounded by normal people. The noisy commuters, the man talking too loud on his phone, the student with her headphones on. It was the real world. I found a seat, collapsed into it, and let the relief wash over me. The nightmare was over. As the train pulled away from Hollow Creek Station, the real, living, breathing conductor came down the aisle, checking tickets. He was a friendly, older man with a kind smile. He took my ticket, punched it with his hole puncher, and handed it back to me. "Have a good morning, miss," he said. I smiled, a real smile, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I glanced down at the ticket he had handed me, and the world fell out from under me. It wasn't my ticket. My flimsy paper commuter rail ticket was gone. In my hand was a piece of thick, old-fashioned yellowed cardboard. In elegant, vintage script, the ticket read, "The Midnight Express, one way." Below that, it listed the destination, Hollow Creek Station, and below that, my seat assignment, Car 3, Seat 14. My head snapped up. I frantically scanned the seats in the car, and I saw her. Sitting in a seat a few rows ahead of me, staring straight ahead with empty eyes, was the woman in the 1940s style hat. I looked across the aisle, the man in the fedora. I looked back at my ticket. The conductor hadn't just punched it. He had swapped it. With a dawning, soul-crushing horror, I realized I hadn't escaped the train. I was on it. The normal, noisy commuter train was fading away. The sounds of the real world were replaced by a heavy, profound silence. The other commuters were becoming still, their faces blank, their forms taking on the faded colors of a bygone era. The friendly conductor was now the silent, pale man in the vintage uniform, standing at the end of the car. I looked out the window. We weren't heading towards the city. The sun was gone. The world outside was dark, and we were heading back towards the flickering, lonely lights of the Hollow Creek station. The train was just making a quick, final loop. It was coming back to pick up its new permanent passenger. As a graffiti artist, you learn to love the sound of a freight train. It's the sound of a fresh canvas rolling into town. I used to paint the cars at the old Clarion freight yard. That was before I saw what else was riding the rails. Before I saw the rust. The rust isn't just decay. It's alive. And it's hungry. My name is Leo, but on the freight lines, they know me as Kaze. I'm a graffiti artist, not the kind that tags up city walls, but the kind that paints the massive steel canvases of freight train cars. There's a purity to it. You paint a masterpiece in the dead of night, and the next day it's gone, traveling the country, seen by 1,000 anonymous eyes. My favorite place to paint was the old Clarion freight yard, a sprawling rust-belt graveyard of forgotten tracks and sleeping steel giants just outside of Cleveland. The yard at night is a cathedral of decay. The air smells of diesel, creosote, and the sweet metallic tang of rust. I was out there on a damp, foggy night working on a new piece on the side of a clean boxcar. I was almost finished when I noticed the car on the track next to mine. It was covered in a strange, thick, reddish-brown patch that I had mistaken for a normal patch of rust. But it was wrong. Rust is dry, flaky. This was wet. It was growing in an unnatural, almost biological web-like pattern, like a slime mold. And even on a cold night, it seemed to be radiating a faint, sickly warmth. I reached out a gloved hand and cautiously touched its surface. It was soft, spongy, and pulsed with a faint, slow rhythm, like sleeping muscle. It was alive. I finished my piece, unnerved, and was packing up my gear to leave. That's when I heard a soft, wet, tearing sound coming from the rusted car. I shone my powerful flashlight on the patch. A small, rust-colored tendril, no thicker than a worm, was slowly peeling a long strip of old paint from the car's surface. It wasn't eating the metal. It was eating the paint, the history, the identity of the car. It was erasing it. As I stood there, frozen, a massive freight train thundered by on the main line a few tracks over, its horn blaring, the ground shaking. The effect on the organism was instantaneous. The entire massive patch of rust seemed to pulse in unison with the vibration, a deep, resonant hum emanating from it, matching the rhythm of the passing train. It was reacting. It was listening. And it felt like it was waking up. I stayed away from the yard for a week, The image of that pulsing, living rust burned into my mind. But the call of a fresh canvas, the addiction of the art, was too strong. I had to go back. I had to see it again. When I returned, the boxcar that I had painted was gone, already on its journey across the country. But the rusted car was still there, sitting on the same dead-end siding. And the thing on its side had grown. The patch was now twice as large, covering nearly half the side of the car. The web-like patterns were more complex, more intricate. It was evolving. I started looking for it. I explored the deepest, most forgotten corners of the yard, and I started to find it everywhere. Always on the oldest, most derelict cars that sat on the disused tracks. Small patches, like a fungal infection, spreading slowly through the yard's forgotten veins. I went online, falling down a rabbit hole of industrial mycology and rust-eating bacteria. I found nothing that matched what I had seen, nothing that was warm, that pulsed, that formed complex patterns. The only thing I found was a single cryptic post on an old, forgotten railroad workers' forum from a decade ago. It was a post about the Clarion Yard. It just said, "Don't go near the cars with the bleed. It ain't rust. And don't ever, ever touch it." I had to get proof. I needed to show someone, to prove I wasn't going crazy. I bought a cheap GoPro and a tripod. The next night, I set it up about 10 feet from the main pulsing mass of the rust and set it to record a time-lapse overnight. When I retrieved the footage the next morning, my hands were shaking. I sat in my car and watched the sped-up horror. The organism was mostly still, pulsing gently, but every time a train would pass on the main line, the effect was explosive. The rust would ripple, and its tendrils would shoot out, expanding a few inches in a matter of seconds, fueled by the vibrations. It was feeding on the energy of the trains. But that wasn't the scariest part. In the middle of the night, in the empty, silent yard, the creature's tendrils began to move with a new purpose. They began to weave and intertwine into a new, complex shape in the center of the rust-colored mass. It was a crude but unmistakable imitation of the graffiti tag I had painted on the car next to it, the piece I had finished just before I first saw it. It wasn't just a mindless organism. It was watching. It was mimicking. I knew I was in over my head. I had stumbled onto something that was not meant to be seen, a secret that the Clarion Yard had been keeping for years. I should have run. I should have destroyed the footage and never come back. But I'm an artist, and this was the most incredible, terrifying thing I had ever seen. I had to go back one last time to get a final, perfect close-up photograph of my tag replicated in living flesh. I went back on a foggy, damp night that muffled all sound. I found the car. The organism had now covered it almost entirely, a monstrous, beautiful, pulsating wall of reddish-brown tissue. And the imitation of my tag was now perfect, a flawless biological replica of my own art. I was so focused on getting the shot, I didn't hear the sound until it was too late. A loud metallic clang of a track switch being thrown somewhere behind me. The siding I was on was no longer a dead end. A small, powerful switch engine was moving cars around in the yard, its single headlight cutting a ghostly beam through the fog. And it was coming my way. I was trapped between two long lines of freight cars. The engine was slow, but it was coming. My only escape was to hide. I saw an open boxcar on the track next to me. Its door slid halfway open. Without a second thought, I tossed my gear inside and climbed in, pulling the heavy door almost shut, leaving just a crack to see through. The moment I was inside, I knew I had made a fatal mistake. The air was warm, damp, and thick with that coppery, metallic smell. I turned on my flashlight. I wasn't alone. The entire interior of the boxcar, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, was coated in a thick, pulsating layer of the living rust. I was standing in the creature's belly. I had hidden from the train inside a different, more patient predator. The switch engine coupled with my car with a violent, bone-jarring jolt. I was thrown to the floor, my flashlight skittering away, and the heavy boxcar door, shaken loose by the impact, slid shut with a deafening boom and locked from the outside with a heavy, final thud. I was trapped in the pitch black, warm and pulsing darkness as the car began to move. The rhythmic clack, 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 clack of the wheels on the track, a soothing, terrifying lullaby for the living walls around me. I was a prisoner in a moving, living cage. Time ceased to have meaning. I don't know if I was in that boxcar for a day or a week. The darkness was absolute. The only sensations were the constant gentle rocking of the train, the warmth of the living walls around me, and the thick, metallic taste of the air. I could feel the rust, its soft, spongy tendrils slowly, curiously exploring me. They would brush against my boots, my jeans, not with aggression, but with a strange, analytical touch. It wasn't trying to eat me. It was studying me, learning me. The train finally shuddered to a stop. The silence that followed was more jarring than the constant motion. I waited in the dark, my body coiled like a spring for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard the groan of the exterior lock. The door slid open, flooding the dark space with a brilliant, blinding, unfamiliar daylight. I scrambled out, half blind and stumbling into the hot sun. I wasn't in the damp, gray Clarion yard anymore. I was in a massive, sun-baked scrap metal yard in the middle of what looked like the Arizona desert. I had traveled halfway across the country, a stowaway in a biological monster. The train that had brought me was gone. I was found by a scrapyard worker, dehydrated and babbling incoherently about a living train car. They took me to a local hospital. I tried to tell the authorities my story, but it was impossible. I was a graffiti artist, a trespasser, who had gotten accidentally locked in a boxcar and had hallucinated from fear and dehydration. I had no proof. My camera, my gear, it was all gone, left behind in that living car. I never painted again. I moved to the coast, as far from the industrial heartland and its train tracks as I could get. I tried to forget. Years later, I was watching a late-night documentary. It was about the decline of the American Rust Belt, a parade of sad, decaying industrial landscapes. And then the camera panned across the Clarion freight yard. My freight yard. My heart stopped. The camera slowly moved down a line of old graffiti-covered cars, a familiar sight that now filled me with a cold, ancient dread. And then it stopped, focusing on one car in particular, the car I had painted that first night. My old Kaze tag was still there, faded and peeling, but visible. But it was the car next to it that made me scream. It was a solid, monstrous, pulsating wall of the living rust, and on its surface, rendered in perfect, horrifying detail, was a new piece of art. It was a flawless, life-size portrait of a young man holding a can of spray paint, his eyes wide open with horror he couldn't comprehend. A self-portrait I had never painted. The rust had learned my face, and it had made me a permanent, traveling part of its collection.